some really interesting presentations, and I've seen that a few people have been chatting online already, which is great. Can you squeeze through? Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind sharing the 2 microphones, they should be on and unmuted, so just use those. So I will go back to the Mentimeter, and we can see that we already had quite a few come in, which is fantastic. So we have about half an hour for this panel, but if you have any questions in the room as well, just wave at me frantically, and I'll try to give you a chance to speak. But perhaps one of the first questions, I'll go way back to Garry's presentation. How can the heritage of a coastline be used to prioritize which areas to protect? Can you use the microphone? Thank you.
Well, the heritage can be used in a couple of ways. Once, of course, there is the inherent value of the coastal heritage when you have significant protected sites. And I think we saw in an earlier slide from a couple of days ago, Hurst Castle, that is an ancient monument that's falling into the sea. So when you have these sites, well, then they have a priority in their own right to protect that bit of coastline. But really, for this project, a lot of what we've been looking at is how we can use the heritage and exposed elements of the heritage to help us identify immediate threats. And that's where things like the Roman posts or the Bronze Age material exposed on the intertidal zone for the first time in hundreds or thousands of years shows you that there is that immediate threat to the coastline, and that's one that one should look at in more detail and prioritize. So I'd say that exposure of ancient deposits, ancient sediments for the first time in thousands of years will give you the answer.
Thank you. And I think there is a follow-up question to that. So you've presented a vast array of evidence coming from all sorts of different sources. How do you scrutinize sources such as artwork to validate whether they're actually true depiction of the actual environment, or if it's just a vision of someone? Perhaps you might see one with a nice church on a cliff, but it was never built because it was just someone's dream to have a church on a hill.
Yeah, no, and that's true with a lot of art. But that's why we have these qualifying and quantifying questions to ask of the art itself, which are outlined. I ran over briefly, but of course within all the various documentation and the methods we use to actually assess bits of artwork. So we do critique it. So we work out whether it's just someone's dream or not, and then we will link it to the artist, etc., the school of art or whatever it might be, and the type of art. And then we would can also combine that with archaeological evidence or historical evidence to see whether that church did exist on the hill in the past. So all these subjects are combined, which perhaps I didn't really stress enough, but we do look at them more collectively, look at them together to feed into each other to get the answers that we need. So we do scrutinize that.
Brilliant. So I'll move over to some of the questions regarding to the Vlissingen pilot. So quite a few from for Fransje. Someone's wondering if there were many conflicts of interest arising because the scope of the project is expanded from coastal defense, but also includes town planning, and it goes across all the different, I suppose, stakeholder groups. So was there a lot of conflict of interest maybe when the engineers are trying to do one thing whilst they're also deciding on how to do another thing, kind of protecting their own background?
Well, of course, the whole implementation phase with the people living in the area was done by the municipality itself. So Marije, I think, talked about it yesterday. You went around with a bus showing the people in the area that this is the approach. But I think that, well, from the start, the idea was to find out and research if this is a way to go. So if accepting the water and not raising the dike was feasible. And so the engineers did feel that it was more a multidisciplinary approach because they basically got the assignment to find out what the exact risk was, so what the flooding would induce and how much water was coming over the dike. So yeah, they in that sense played another role, and that's why we also afterwards did the pilot here in Southend-on-Sea, where we did ask them to, what for them when taking a nature-based approach would be a way on a longer-term strategic level to make Southend-on-Sea safe. So then it was more an interdisciplinary approach.
Okay, anyone has any comments? Not yet. So someone else was also wondering, so you're allowing water into the city in Vlissingen, and you used modeling for 1 in 100,000 years and 1 in 10,000 years storms, and you have the different amounts of water. But if you look at smaller events, at what point is the water going to start going into the city? How often will it happen? And is that going to affect, for example, the green space, which is currently used for dog walkers, as you mentioned, and general recreation? Is the salt water going to completely destroy all the vegetation there every couple of years? How is that going to be managed? Has that been considered?
Well, we took the 1 in 10,000 frequency, and it is also what you see, these volumes are in 2100. So it is quite extreme. So it is designing for the extreme. So yeah, it's never, you're never, that's why you need this bandwidth also of scenarios to somehow have an understanding. So when it will happen, yes, it will destroy, it's because it's salt water, it will destroy the nature that is there at that moment for some time. It is not to say how often this will happen. Yeah.
Okay, so it's almost like a last resort defense. If there is a really extreme event, it will prevent widespread damage, but it's not expected to kind of function on a very regular basis.
Well, it will be designed. I mean, it's a natural area that will be designed in a way that that it brings a lot of biodiversity and amenities for the town every day of every year. So if this flooding will happen once every 5 years, yes, nature will have to recuperate. But that nature is much better at that than we are. So in that sense, the consequences are only there for the green area, not for people. So people will not die, there will not be other damage. So, yeah.
Thank you. So that brings me to another thought. Perhaps this one's good for Hanne to answer. What is the reasonable balance between reconnecting people to nature and ensuring that nature can actually thrive? And we're focusing on giving value, which is very human-centric. But are we actually considering value of nature for nature? And where is the balance between those two?
Yeah, we are valuing for nature, of course, but yeah, also for ourselves. Yeah, the thing is, numbering, evaluating everything, yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do. Yeah, but for people, we need to do it because everyone has another language. Everyone speaks in a different language. Like for example, policy members, they think completely different than another one. Like a scientific researcher, we all have different languages. So it's really important to value that for the people, but also for nature as well, because if you don't put a number on it, we cannot monitor anything. We need numbers, data, otherwise we cannot see if nature is getting worse or better, or the ecosystems are getting worse or better. So yeah, that's for both, yeah.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned, did you want to add something, Garry?
Well, I'm just going to add that the value, I think, is really quite significant, and I think that's something that's coming out of this this conference from the discussions we had on the first day to Hanne's presentation just there. It's a need to really attribute some form of value to these nature-based solutions, and one can do that with the rise in the house prices or the value, the values that were put forward by Hanne just now. So, I think we need to apply figures, and that applies to the cultural heritage and the value of the cultural heritage, and how we can use that nature-based solution to improve society and make everyone richer and be seen to make everyone richer if we're going to try and attract more finances from financial institutions to support this work in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the ecosystem services are also very valuable for your research for the longue durée. It's definitely a match. Yeah, so that's really important to take into account as well. Yeah.
Yes, just to continue that little conversation, is that we will be doing the next stage, I think. We need to incorporate that into the visualization tool that we've talked about. And I think those queries will be sort of added over the next few months to really bring out that element to make it more useful for internally and externally.
So we have a question in the room at the back. Isaac, can you bring a microphone across?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, it's more a comment really. I work at Southend on Sea City Council. I manage another EU Interreg project called Nature Smart Cities. We've just spent the last 3 years developing a business model to value green infrastructure or blue-green infrastructure projects. It's an automated Excel tool. And it allows you to pick from 15 ecosystem services. So it encourages you to pick your priority 6 or 7. And it allows you to put in your potential plans. It allows you to compare different scenarios, grey versus green, different options for green scenarios, and to assess, and it gives you an output, it gives you the value that you can obtain for those different ecosystem services. Sometimes that's economically, where that's possible. Sometimes that it's quantified, and sometimes it's more qualitative in terms of social ecosystem services. But it does allow you to go across that range. It's a decision support tool. So the idea is that you can put your potential projects into that tool, and you can use the results as evidence to support investment in those projects. It can also be used at the design phase to enhance your projects. You can look at the water retention levels your project will deliver, or the biodiversity enhancements you will gain, and you can tweak it to deliver more value for those potential priority ecosystem services. So it's also a tool to kind of get people thinking about different ecosystem services, look at the co-benefits and how they can enhance them from their projects. But it's really great to see that you've reviewed the different pilots. You could also use our tool to look at your pilots and see what the results are. I mean, when we developed the tool, we also did extensive review of all the existing tools and looked at the limitations with them in terms of providing data for urban blue-green infrastructure projects. And we also interviewed a lot of local authorities. I think some that might be sitting in this room, maybe some of your colleagues took part in our interviews. So we really hope that it's a tool that maybe some of you might be interested in using, and we hope it's useful. And we'd love to, I think, test it in the more of a coastal environment. The University of Antwerp and University of Ghent, who developed it, after the project, they've taken on responsibility to maintain the tool and update it going forward, and they're looking at ways to enhance it, new projects, etc. So we'd love to hear more from SARCC on its potential use.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that input, and I'm sure we can set up some communication and links during the breaks to continue that collaboration. So I think this actually brings up, and some of your answers as well have done, the issue of data, and where does the data come from? How do we deal with data gaps? Flavia mentioned in her presentation that a lot of the monitoring of the pilots hasn't quite yet been finished, so there's a lot of conclusions we can't really make. And Hanne, you also talked about a lot of data capture. Once you've selected your models to use, then it was still a very extensive data collection exercise. So how do we bridge those data gaps, and how can we apply these methods on the coastline as a whole, rather than just very specifically to each pilot? I guess it's almost like, how do we mainstream this approach so it's applicable elsewhere as well? Do you want to start, Flavia?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, I think a good way to gather this data is to go back to these pilots, and after 1 or 2 years, once they have the empirical data from their monitoring, to send similar questions back and ask them to provide this data.
Mm-hmm.
So from our perspective with the longue durée, the questions we've asked of the data, I think we can find the data wherever we're looking. And I should actually point out, in relation to the earlier question about the art, I should say that when the analysis of the different disciplines, of be it the art or the archaeology or the heritage, we did work sort of over 10 years ago to put those questions together by working with coastal managers and working with art historians and archaeologists in various countries around Europe to actually devise these different questions. Now, so the questioning is there. The data isn't necessarily missing if we look for it, but it's only within the pilots, which is the point. Now, how we mainstream it, I suppose, is to get people to recognise the value of all the work we've been doing and to apply it to future developments. And it would be good to have another Interreg project, take it forward, to expand it across many different areas, many different districts. But unfortunately, we had this Brexit thing going on. So it's all been a bit compromised for us, but it's not to say that it can't be continued by our partners on the continent.
From the perspective of the ecosystem services, yeah, there are definitely many gaps, but we try to complete those gaps with the proxies that I explained. So for each kind of type of data that you're looking for, you can find in so many literature, for example, a formula that fits the data that you're looking for, or it is not exactly what you're looking for, but you can use it to try to give a value to it. So in that sense, it's always an estimation ecosystem services. It's not a one-on-one relationship. So we try to solve it in that way. Yeah. And another thing is that we also still need to communicate with other projects, like the tool that was mentioned. I know of the tool. But the thing is with projects, you need to talk to each other, and then you know the data that someone else has, and then you can join everything together. So it's really a matter of communicating with other researchers, because research is never done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add something?
Well, I think that especially in urban development, the main point is that the data is of a very different nature if you look across all sectors, and that also it needs to be transformed into information to be able to discuss them about this. So this is what interdisciplinary design methodology is about. How can you really understand and translate data from different people in steps? And it means that you really have to have a sort of orchestration on data. So it needs to be not too detailed in the first step, and then you go into the resolution. So I think that data management is also really about the orchestration of data. And for us in doing the work for Vlissingen and Southend-on-Sea, is that you see that, which is very interesting, is that hydraulic engineering also takes a lot of assumptions. And then they think we are the softies. And I'm thinking, but you are also, well, you somehow have your hard data numbers, and we have our fuzzy data. But in the end, they also take a lot of assumptions. So I felt that's really a topic I would really like to dive into deeper. And that they worked with a Delft 3D model for Vlissingen, and that is already on the base of a lot of that is very easy. It's basically very available. This was not the case for Southend-on-Sea. That was one big pain. We never got the data actually because someone owns it, and they just never gave it.
Okay. This kind of notion of collaboration keeps coming up and sharing information. So I think that's one of the main learnings of this whole conference, really, is talk to each other and share. There's been quite a few questions about the ecosystem services in more detail. quite a few people are wondering about, for example, the house prices, which have been mentioned already yesterday. So you've done some modeling which has predicted a certain increase in house prices. How does that correspond to the values that were presented yesterday in the pilot presentation of Middelkerke, for example?
They match. Yeah.
They match.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I was not aware of the data of Steen until yesterday, so I wrote it down, and it's really a match. So that's a good thing. Yeah. But the thing is, I didn't know exactly which scale he used. Is it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that he calculated? But we did it for 1 year and also for 10 years. And yeah, I think there's a line in there that it's a match. Yeah. So that's good news. Yeah, that's a bit validated then. Yeah.
And someone else is wondering also, you mentioned in your presentation reduced mortality. How was that measured?
Exercise. So people, when somebody cycles or walks more, then you have a formula that's linked to that proves that you're healthier, and so you live longer. So that was the key formula in the tool we used. Yeah.
Okay. I'll move over to the pilot paradox, which Flavia explained brilliantly. How do we move from pilot scale trials to large commercial scale studies and deployment of NBS? So you obviously mentioned that from the SARCC project so far, it seems that pilot paradox doesn't necessarily apply, that those projects can be scaled up and they can be successful externally as well. But what is the next step following the studies that we've done within SARCC?
Well, I think Middelkerke is quite a good example of that it is possible to scale up and mainstream from a pilot to a larger area. It takes a bit more time. So across all the pilots, we saw that they face some inflexibility from the legal perspective when getting the permits. But they were able to go over these barriers by taking more time, and finally they got the permit. So I think it is possible if you engage with the right organizations in the right time that have the competence in coastal management and in taking the decisions.
Thank you.
And also gathering the right scientific data that really proves that nature-based solutions work. So a combination of factors. What was relevant in SARCC was that most of the pilot managers mentioned that when the local communities were on board, then the mayor was also convinced. So these two things went hand in hand, and once the mayors were convinced, then it was really easy to go forward from there and get all the permits.
Mm-hmm. Garry, did you want to add something?
Yes, and just building on that, building on the earlier discussion really about where next. I think this has been, we've dealt with pilots, but it's been a pilot initiative. I mean, this is really just a demonstration of what can be done. A lot of the work with the knowledge partners was conducted after permissions had already been granted for many of the developments. So they were already underway. Was a lot of work that knowledge partners should do should be applied at the beginning when the sites are being conceived, the ideas are being conceived, to help inform the decision-making process around the development of a sort of coastal defence or coastal development. So that would be the next phase as well, to really say, now bring this to the beginning of the project and not the whole lot. So to use this wonderful SARCC project as an example that we can build on for further developments in the future.
Thank you. So there was a lot of comments about the value of these solutions. What about cost? Has there been a cost-benefit analysis carried out on all of the pilots? Has that been compared against the maybe obvious value, but also the proxy value that, for example, ecosystem services have measured?
Yes, we got some data from the pilot managers about how much they needed to spend to implement nature-based solutions. So that's also one of the formulas. Yeah, again, formulas and proxies. Yeah, it's included definitely. Yeah, and then you can see how much you gain, value minus the costs. Yeah.
Okay. There was another question, well actually a few, which are all about access to information. And it's good to see that some local municipalities are saying this is all great stuff, but we're a small municipality. How do we keep an overview? How do we access all this information? What would your message be to little towns or even villages somewhere on the coast that are very new to the whole concept of nature-based solutions and perhaps don't have as many resources to kind of keep track of these, such as one of the larger cities like Vlissingen or Southend, who have a much bigger team of engineers who are already used to working with this kind of information. Fransje?
Well, I guess that Vlissingen is also, I mean, I live in Rotterdam. If you look at the engineering office of Rotterdam, is 500. In Vlissingen, I don't know, 20. Yeah. So I would say that in this project that all the South Sea is actually quite big. Then are small scale municipalities that because I think especially for Vlissingen, the reason also to ask the TU Delft is because they needed resources to be able to explore this other approach, and our Rijkswaterstaat and the Water Board would not support this because this is not what they do. They build dikes. So I think in that sense, for smaller villages to participate in these kind of projects is something that could be really helpful. And another thing is that what you see in the Netherlands, and this is not common within this topic, I think, is that a lot of regional municipalities cooperate on certain topics. So we, for example, have like an historical, say the monument care. That's a very Dutch translation. Care for monuments is done in big municipalities by a department in municipality. But for smaller municipalities, they usually have a regional body that does that for all these small. So in that sense, I would say that for this topic, it would be quite good for smaller municipalities to team up with others, and in that sense, share and cooperate in this.
I want to add something. I think the engagement is the most important part of getting smaller communities, smaller villages into this story. So that's why in SARCC we did the engagement work package 2. It's button up. If you can convince the people that live nearby a nature-based solution, then the message keeps on spreading, and then you reach the local authorities, how small they are, you can reach them. If you are really convinced of your opinion that nature-based solutions are a good way for protection. So it's really, I think, a bottom-up story. And then if you have the local authorities who agree with you, and I think you can, rise, and then you can convince as well the bigger ones to join up and to make a great nature-based solution.
Garry?
I think I'd just also add that it's I suppose it's a matter of expediency. Whatever size of an authority you have, if they are tasked with sort of protecting part of their landscape or their coastline, effectively nature-based solutions are better and cheaper. So there's going to be a gain there, whatever size they look at. So there will be a cost saving. So once you can get that message across, well, then you're on a winner.
Brilliant. Any final remarks from the room? No, so we have reached the end of our slot for the panelists. I would like to thank all of you for your contribution. And someone online also said, exceptionally well done to everyone from the Netherlands and Belgium. Their standard of English is fantastic. And we do appreciate that. So a round of applause for our panelists, please.